Well, first of all, thank you, everyone, and thank you, above all, for the wonderful introductions. And I'm very happy that there are so many of you here. Today, I would like to tell you about the place where I work, the International Youth Meeting Center. So just bear with me as I start the presentation, as I have to find my mouse. It has disappeared. There we go. My name is David Kennedy, as of course you already mentioned. That's interestingly one of the first things that I tell groups when I start a guided tour at the Auschwitz Museum. And so I actually work in two places. I started working at the Auschwitz Museum in 2007. And this was a job that brought me because of my family history. Living in the Polish city of Oświęcim, the German name of the town is Oświęcim, is Auschwitz. And so it has been Auschwitz for centuries. And my family has lived in this town for generations. And the history of Auschwitz, as they were slave laborers, forced laborers next to the camp, they weren't in the camp itself. My grandparents never spoke about this. And so that's what brought me there, to try and understand and learn what they had experienced and how this affected my family in many ways. I was born in the United States, but of course I returned to Poland. After working at the Auschwitz Museum for nearly 15, 16 years, I started a job at a center next to Auschwitz, which is known as the International Youth Meeting Center in Oświęcim. And just a few words to introduce the center. The International Youth Meeting Center has a very simple concept. Auschwitz as a place of learning. It's an extracurricular educational institution that was established December 7th of 1986. So over 40 years after the war, by a German organization called the Action Reconciliation Service for Peace. I'll get into their history a little bit later. But they're a volunteer organization that works in Poland, other countries that were affected by what was known as National Socialism, and even in Israel. And in essence, to try and rebuild what Nazi Germany had destroyed, both personally and diplomatically and physically. Now, the site, the center, was not only founded by the Action Reconciliation Service for Peace, but it was supported by former Auschwitz prisoners. And it was also supported by the Polish city of Oświęcim, the city that Auschwitz is in. And the main thing was that young people would come to the center, not only young, everyone's young at heart, so we also have adults. And they would, of course, learn and in essence, try and remove some of the myths and stereotypes and misunderstandings about how Auschwitz came to be. A Polish prisoner named Marian Turski, a Jewish survivor, he said Auschwitz did not simply fall from the sky. It's something that happened over the course of the Nazi government. And it's something that even, you can say, was something that was created and developed with this, of course, goal of Nazi Germany taking over Europe, but also destroying many of the people in it. Now, the center, you can see a picture here of one of the groups doing a workshop. This is basically how we set the work there. In occupied Poland during the Second World War, there were 6 death camps. You can see the outline of Poland on the map. And Auschwitz-Birkenau was the largest in terms of its size, its death toll. And there was also the other camps that you can see here, Chełmno, Majdanek, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec. But at the same time, the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. estimates there were 44,000 different sites, ranging from the 6 death camps down to slave labor camps, even camps for detaining youth. Around 200,000 Polish children were stolen to be adopted by German families. So this is only the tip of the iceberg here, but it was the largest of the camps. And it kind of seems natural that a center like this would come into existence next to a site like this, but it took over 40 years for it to happen. Now, the city of Oświęcim, this is an aerial photograph taken by the Allies in 1944, before they did bombing runs on a large factory, one of the largest construction projects during the Second World War, a huge chemical plant. You can see it, unfortunately, it's a very small text here. IG Farben Industry. That's the factory right here. These are the camps. And you can see that the International Meeting Center, the IYMC, is right in between the two main camps, Auschwitz-Birkenau at the very top. Then there's Auschwitz just below it, the IYMC, and the city of Oświęcim is also shown right there that we highlighted. And so this is kind of the bridge between the past and the present. That's what we often say about the center. That's what many of the former prisoners who came to our center, who talked to the young people there, often said about it. It was a place for discussions. Now, if you're not aware, Auschwitz was a place where at least 1.3 million people were deported to. We know that in those 4 years and about 7.5 months, at least 1.1 million people were murdered in these camps. 90% of them were Jews, and 75% of the Jews murdered there were never registered. They simply were sent directly into the gas. Those who were registered, the Jews, they often were worked to death. 90% of all Jews brought to Auschwitz would be murdered. And 1.3 million people deported. 1.1 million were Jews, 1 million were murdered. 140,000 Poles who were brought there, about 70, and there's a mistake here that I made, between 70 to 75,000 were murdered. 23,000 Sinti and Roma, 21,000 were killed. 15,000 Soviet prisoners of war, about 14,000 are murdered. And also 12,000 people of their nations, meaning non-Jews from the Czech and Slovak lands, from Ukraine, from France, from Italy, from various countries. These people, half of them were murdered, at least 1.1 million. Auschwitz became, after the war, a symbol of the vast atrocities. It was a place that there were 200,000 survivors who left the camp. That doesn't mean that those people survived to the end of the war. Sometimes they were sent to other camps as they were being transported away. But there were survivors who were able to speak about it. And there are thousands of testimonies. Either they were taken by the Shoah Foundation, that is of course, in California, or by the various Holocaust memorial museums, by the Auschwitz Museum, and even by our center. And so this is how we have the information about the sites, even though most of the documentation was destroyed. Now, on top of this, in Poland, the trauma is that there were about 5.6 to 6 million citizens of Poland who were murdered. This was the largest proportion of any country. And nearly 3 million of those citizens were Jews. And they were murdered in the gas chambers. Poland lost almost the entire Jewish population. And Poland also lost about 150,000 citizens to the war and the repressions by the Soviets. Now, with this, of course, like I said, it would be almost natural to have a place where there would be study visits, that people would come to learn. And that's what happens with our center. And groups that are coming to us are usually school groups. They're organized by teachers, by local foundation leaders in Germany, and but also from other countries as well. And is focused on the visit to the former Auschwitz-Birkenau sites. And when the groups come to us, one of our colleagues at our center is a professional in the logistics. She takes that Auschwitz visit. The group has to make it themselves because of the way the museum works. And then around this is organized a study trip that involves workshops. The groups come to us, and sometimes they have their own workshops prepared, but sometimes we're the ones preparing them for them. And the idea is to get these young people, and like I said, even older people, we're all young, as I said, kind of talking about the things that they don't understand, the things that are on their minds before the visit, after the visit. And they also get to see the Polish city of Oświęcim, a city that itself was a unique town before the Second World War, as it was a place with about 12,000 inhabitants, a simple European city in Central Europe that had an excellent rail connection that was important to the Nazis during the Holocaust. It had buildings which were part of a Polish army base, which Auschwitz I would become. And that Polish population of the city, which was about 6,000 to 7,000 people, completely disappeared by 1941. They were sent to ghettos. many of the Poles living in the town who weren't Jews, the Catholics, were also being expelled to various places. And there were these waves of repression against those who remained, who became forced laborers. Many of them also joined the resistance. It was very secretive. Most of them never spoke about it, even after the war. And they attempted to bring some food and, of course, medications, to take secret messages out of the camp. And this tour is conducted by volunteers from that organization that I mentioned, the Action Reconciliation Service for Peace. We have volunteers, young people who are coming between their high school and college time, and they spend a year at our center, usually one or two of them from the Action Reconciliation. They lead the tours through the various places, including the Great Synagogue in Oświęcim. This empty space where the group is standing is where this building stood up until 1939 in November, when the Nazis destroyed it. Before the war, in this town of 12,000 people, about 6,000 to 7,000 being Jews, there were over 20 places of worship for Jews. Almost all of them are gone, except for a single synagogue that still stands. Not only are there of course, tours, but the space that our center has is unique. It's made to be kind of light, kind of airy. This is one of the main seminar halls. We have seminar rooms, and it's all, you could say, a simple institution for education, meaning simple in terms of how physically it's constructed. But we also have the seminar rooms and certain places within our center named after former prisoners. For example, Zofia Posmysz. Zofia Posmysz is a survivor of Auschwitz. She passed away a few years ago. And so a small cafe that we have at our center that occasionally is open, sometimes, usually during the day it's not, but for groups it is. It's named after her. And there are also many testimonies of prisoners that people can read, not only in the cafe, but we also do have an extensive library of different texts and materials and books. But our center is not only a place where, of course, this education is taking place, it's a place of contemplation. We have a center, in our center, of course, the House of Silence. And it's simply a place where groups can go to and even speak, of course. That's where some of the groups have an open discussion, but it's also a place where they can either meditate or pray. It's a place where they can, of course, reflect on what they saw at the Auschwitz site. And if any of you have been there at Auschwitz, I'm sure you understand the kind of the silence, moment of silence that you have afterwards, which allows you to kind of digest what you have seen. The accommodations at our center, also very simple. It's like a youth hostel. Many of the groups that are coming here, they sleep in a room that doesn't have any televisions, any radios. And so that's what it looks like. Buildings like this, a beautiful garden. And of course, we have a dining hall. And so the groups don't really have to think about much once this program is organized. The garden is also a space for large meetings. For example, the anniversary of an uprising by the Roma and Sinti prisoners at Auschwitz is in August, beginning of August. And every year, we have a large group from the different foundations from Roma people that are coming to have meetings. We also have another way for students to kind of decompress. Not only have the House of Silence, but also if anybody practices sport, we have a soccer field, we have a place for playing basketball. We also have an art gallery. An art gallery that was donated by Volkswagen, a company that is very much connected to our center. And Volkswagen donated this, the money for the construction of, and I don't know if you guys know this word in German, Gesamtkunstwerk. It's, in other words, it's a complete artistic installation. And this artist, Gerhard Richter, is one of the most prominent German artists and one of the most expensive German artists. He's currently in his 90s. He created paintings that are inside that are based on photographs that were taken inside of Auschwitz. And he first made the paintings, realizing that he cannot improve, or you could say amplify, what he had painted. As you can see, they're very abstract, but you have to see them in order to, up close and of course personally, to appreciate them. And of course, with all of this infrastructure, groups can come and also do seminars. So my colleagues and I we are working on providing seminars for groups, and this includes Polish and German youth who are meeting, and of course, for example, a photography workshop that happens in Dachau and that happens in Auschwitz. There's also art and history, and a Polish-German seminar that we have, and also human rights yesterday, human rights today. We also carry out lectures, but this isn't only for those groups that are coming to us. These are also for the local community in Oświęcim. The local community can also play sports here. And there's also an international social political poster biennale that takes place. And it's something for professional artists from across the world, even from Iran, from Syria, from countries with heavy repression. Sometimes these artists, they send some of their work and they request that we do not name them if they do win a prize. And so these are the kind of educational things that are taking place, but also for the local community. The Krakow Poetry Salon, where Polish actors come and do dramatic readings of poetry. We have art exhibits that take place, and this one is by a former Auschwitz prisoner, Józef Szajna, a Polish man. And for the 80th anniversary of the liberation, his artwork was placed here. And so, like I said, it seems kind of natural. You have a place like this, great tragedy, and you have a museum, and you also have a place of education. But it took over 40 years for this place to be created. And one of the main reasons was that Europe was divided by the Iron Curtain. When the war came to an end, Poland was devastated. And not only this, Poland was moved about 200 miles to the west. The Soviets took over about 200 miles of the east of Poland, and what was Germany was taken by the Polish state. And this was kind of imposed in a way by Stalin, by the Soviet Union. And so you can see in red, there are two lines showing the Oder and the Neisse rivers. And that was known as the Oder-Neisse line. And this became, directly after the war, a point of contention, where even though Germany lost the war, it was occupied by the British, by the French, by the Americans, by the Soviets. The West Germans, it was very difficult for them to accept what had happened. And one of the main reasons was that thousands of Germans had been expelled from what became Western Poland into Germany, and they became a strong lobby for this. Even in 1947, as, of course, the Cold War was starting, the conservative German political party, the CDU, released a poster, and you can see here where that rip is in a poster, or at least in the image, that you have what is today the German borders on the left-hand side. On the right, that's a part of Poland, and of course Kaliningrad. And those are the areas which were taken from Germany after they lost the Second World War. And so it says here, never the Oder-Neisse line. And like I said, this became a moment where, in many cases, Poland was still reconstructing. There was still the trauma of the Second World War, and many Poles were afraid that there was going to be a next conflict. In 1947, that is also when, pardon me, Polish prisoners had started to occupy the Auschwitz former site. They came there to make certain that the site would become a place of memory. Nobody really knew what to do with these sites. There was a great debate in Poland and across, of course, the central part of Europe where these camps had been. And former prisoners, when they came to the site, they started to preserve it. And they also started to guide people who were coming to the site on their own to either seek family members or to pay respect to the dead. And in the summer of 1947, the Auschwitz Memorial Museum was founded. And this was at the same time where, of course, these kind of discussions were happening about what was going to be the future of these newly acquired Polish territories. And many of the former Auschwitz prisoners, as well as prisoners from other camps, their motto after the war was "Never again war." Now, 1950 was a moment that brought a little bit of relief. That's when Poland and East Germany signed the Treaty of Görlitz, and that Oder-Neisse line was officially recognized by East Germany, not West Germany, but East Germany. And in 1958, still during this tension of the Cold War, the Synod of the Evangelical Church in Germany met in Berlin-Spandau. And that's when Lothar Kressig, the president of the Synod, he announced the call for the establishment of an organization that would try and seek understanding, peace, through voluntary work. And Lothar Kressig, he began his call for the founding of this, what he called the Action Reconciliation Service for Peace, by saying, we Germans started the Second World War, thereby causing immeasurable suffering to humanity more than others. Germans, in a blasphemous revolt against God, killed millions of Jews. Those of us who survived did not want this and did not do enough to prevent it. That last sentence is very important in this case because of who Lothar Kressig was. Lothar Kressig died in 1986, but he was born before the First World War. He served in the First World War. He became a lawyer after the war. He became a judge, and he was a judge during the National Socialist period in Germany. In the 1940s, as a judge in Chemnitz, Germany, he started to realize that there are many documents coming across his desk, which are death certificates from a local, what seems to be kind of a sanatorium. And he started signing these, but he also heard these rumors that there's a euthanasia program against the disabled. These people are being murdered. And he actually stepped forward and started to legally challenge the basis of these killings. He was summoned to Berlin. The Minister of Justice spoke to him. His name was Gunther. And Gunther showed him a letter from Adolf Hitler stating that this program is starting. And Lothar Kressig simply said that the Führer's word does not make law. Lothar Kressig continued to be, of course, a judge for a few years, until 1942, when he was personally removed from his position by Adolf Hitler. It's a miracle this man was not taken to the concentration camps by the Gestapo. But after the war, like I said, he founded the Action Reconciliation for Peace, co-founded it, and he even believed himself that he did not do enough to prevent what was happening. 1965 was when groups of German youth started to come to Auschwitz and the camp Majdanek. These were East German youth. They were coming from the East German part of the Action Reconciliation Service. And so this was started these pilgrimages where the German youth were coming to visit the site. And when they came to Auschwitz, they met the curator of the museum, a former Auschwitz prisoner named Tadeusz Szymański. I'll point him out. That's him right here. Tadeusz Szymański would meet with these groups and guide them. And he was somebody that very much believed in this international dialogue, intercultural dialogue, to make sure that something like Auschwitz, like war, would not be able to happen. 1965, the East German groups were coming. 1967, West German groups started to come across the Iron Curtain, which was a very difficult thing. And they were coming here in a way kind of unofficially. So this meant that they really didn't have a place to stay. During the communist period in Poland, if you stayed in a certain place for a couple of weeks, you needed to register as basically a resident of the place. And so where they were staying was actually within the Auschwitz Museum in the building of the former commandant, Rudolf Hiss. This was proving for many of these young people who were volunteering here. They were doing something good with their hands, as it was known, meaning that they were doing a lot of work of the overgrown site of the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp. The Auschwitz Museum was still in, of course, communist Poland, and Poland was still reconstructing. So there wasn't the people power to actually sometimes do some of this work or the money. And so these young Germans were actually coming not only to learn, but also to do something good. And they were staying, of course, on the grounds of the site. It was very intense for them. So there were already kind of feelings that there needs to be a place for these groups to come where they can meet, they can be just outside of the site that is not part of Auschwitz. Now, in 1970, the German Chancellor, Willy Brandt from West Germany, he came to sign the Treaty of Warsaw. This was finally kind of, you could say, the recognition of that Oder-Neisse line, of that border between West Germany and, of course, between the Germanys, if they were unified, of course, and Poland, that this issue would be finally put to rest. When Willy Brandt came to Warsaw, he actually visited the picture we have right here, the monument to the victims of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. There were two uprisings in Warsaw. One was in the ghetto, where the Jews were being kept. And of course, as they were being deported to the death camps, Jews started to, of course, realize what is happening. And an uprising was, of course, launched, which was a disaster. It was a failed uprising. Many of those inside of the Warsaw Ghetto were murdered. Willy Brandt, when he visited, like politicians do, a wreath is brought, and he was supposed to walk up to the wreath and, of course, bow his head. Instead, he spontaneously fell to his knees. This was seen in Poland as, you could say, kind of course, in a positive light. In Germany, we know that about over half people, after a poll was done a week after this, that it was excessive, it was too much. There was still this kind of feeling that the outreach wasn't appropriate. But within a couple of years, his party won its highest election result in its history, all because of the so-called Ostpolitik, kind of trying to calm tensions in Europe, make sure that there wouldn't be such conflict in the future. Now, with this was the impetus, of course, for the creation of the center. The proposal for the construction, I know there's a lot of writing here, but this is, you could say, the godfather of our center right here. His name is Volker von Thurne. He was a German writer, and he had learned as a young man that both his grandfather and his father had been high-ranking members of the SS. He joined, the Action Reconciliation Service for Peace, became its director for Central Eastern Europe, and he, of course, wanted this place to be set, to be created. And he said the task of the, he called it the IJBS, which is in German, the International Meeting Center, will be to welcome young people from all over the world who visit Auschwitz and provide them with the opportunity to discuss the burning questions of understanding and reconciliation between nations against the backdrop of history. Because without a historical awareness, which also includes knowledge about Auschwitz, service in peace is not possible. Now, this is what began the process. By 1975, the Action Reconciliation Service for Peace, they signed an agreement with a Polish communist organization. So this is Western Europe and Polish, and you guys are very young here, most of you, and I think that it's hard to stress just how important a breakthrough like this would have been. That this Western organization was able to sign with the communist-led organization that was part of the government this kind of agreement. And the organization in Poland was called Zbowid. This was a group of veterans who were on the Soviet side of the, you could say, resistance against the Nazis in Poland. And also, this was a group of former concentration camp inmates. But this organization was also centrally controlled by the communist state about how the memory should be put out there, what it should look like. And of course, there was this movement by them to create a center like this. Now, the selection of the site happened in October of 1976, and the reason why I show you this picture right here, and I'm sorry for the graininess of the picture, it's from a newspaper. You have in the forefront here a representative of the government in Oświęcim named Tadeusz Gabor. So he was somebody from the local planning, you could say, administration. And then Volker von Thurne in the background, and behind them, you can see there in the background, is the skyline of Oświęcim. And so that's where the center was located. It's also in a very symbolic location for one reason, is that during the Nazi period in Oświęcim, many of the inhabitants around the camp itself, when the Nazis established the camp, were expelled from their houses. There was a special zone known as a zone of interest. There's a film that was recently made about the commandant of Auschwitz, Rudolf Hess. And houses were dismantled where Poles had been living that were seen as too decrepit, or places that wouldn't be inhabited by the German guards, and prisoners, if they escaped from the camp, they could hide in. So these homes were dismantled. This was territory where Polish families were expelled from, their houses dismantled, And up until this point in 1976, we don't know what happened to those families to this day. But the site was under the administration of the city, and then it was given to the center. In about a year later, there was a fundraising campaign that took place for the center, and that little ticket that you see there, that's known as a Baustein or a building block, they're being sold at 10 Deutschmarks apiece. And in the middle is the man who bought the first one, Willy Brandt, the man who kneeled at the monument in Warsaw. He, of course, kind of symbolically laid claim to the first one. By 1981, this is all taking very many years of discussion and, of course, diplomacy. Volker von Turna's wife laid the first cornerstone of the center. He had passed away about a year earlier from an illness. And 1981, September, was only a couple of months before Poland fell under martial law. In Poland, before, of course, I should say in the late 1970s, there was a movement known as Solidarity that came about. Solidarity was a movement that was working to improve workers' rights, to bring a more democratic system into the socialist state. And as, of course, they tried to get these reforms going, they realized over time, many in the Solidarity movement, that the only path is to dismantle communism. And 1981 was the moment where the Polish communist state wanted to, of course, clamp down on this uprising in a way. This very peaceful uprising that was done through, of course, protests and petitions. And martial law was launched on the 13th of December of 1981. This is an iconic picture that was taken by a Polish-British photographer named Chris Niedenthal in Warsaw. He took it secretly from a window that shows the Moscow cinema that was showing the film Apocalypse Now and an armored people carrier in front of it. He said he snuck into this building from which he took the photograph to make sure that you couldn't see his lens flashing if he was getting his picture ready, and he snapped this photograph. Poland was under martial law until 1983. And during this time, there were troops in the streets, armored people carriers, there were internal, you could say, borders that you had to cross, and at the same time, there was curfew. And all the work that was being done for the creation of the center simply stopped. By 1984, things could kind of come back to normality. Poland was no longer isolated from the rest of Europe. And that's when a German architect, if you look at the photograph on the left-hand side, the man with the beard, his name is Helmut Morlock, or was, I should say. He has passed away. And on the right, the man with him with the cigarette is Alfred Przybylski. Helmut Morlock was a German architect who, during the war, was a member of the Hitler Youth. He realized, of course, the damage that this organization was doing to him and his fellow countrymen. And he joined as an architect for the creation of the center with a former Auschwitz prisoner named Alfred Przybylski, who was in the very first transport to Auschwitz. They worked together in the plan for the creation of the center as it is today. And on the right-hand side, you have some of the others who were involved in this endeavor. There were also former prisoners, Lucjan Motyka, Alfred Przybylski, and I'll point them out to you in a second, and Christoph Heubner, who's also one of the founders of the center, also a member of the Action Reconciliation Service for Peace. Currently, Christoph Heubner is the vice president of the International Auschwitz Committee. So this is Lucjan Motyka, and this is Christoph Heubner, and this is, of course, Alfred Przybylski. Work on the construction of the center started in 1986 in May, and if any of you know anything about communism, all construction projects took years to complete. This was done in a dramatically quick fashion. May 1986, parts of buildings, prefabricated sections of buildings were brought from Bavaria to Oświęcim by German workers, and then Polish workers, construction workers, were the ones putting the building up. And so this was, again, an international kind of, you could say, endeavor. And this is how the building was being constructed until December of 1986. And the opening was December 7th of 1986. And this was the anniversary basically to the day when Willy Brandt kneeled spontaneously in front of the monument in Warsaw. The center is something that from its beginning, even before it began, Tadeusz Szymański, that man who was the curator of the Auschwitz Museum who met those German groups, he was a great supporter to create it. One of our seminar rooms is named after him. Others who supported it were the people that you see right here. Unfortunately, most of them passed away. But these were the former prisoners who came to our center, who spoke with young people. And some of them were known on the international stage. Others were known more locally. Some of them, of course, they wrote about their experiences. And among these people, Zofia Posmysz, you can see there in the upper right-hand corner, she died in 2022. She was a Polish Catholic woman who came to Auschwitz, and when she arrived in the camp, she met a Polish army officer named Tadeusz Paulona. Tadeusz Paulona saw that Zofia, he was training her to do her job as a record keeper in the kitchen in the camp. Usually men and women didn't mix, but since he was a trainer, he was training her as this prisoner, training another prisoner. He noticed that she was losing hope. She was losing her, of course, will to live. And he had another prisoner secretly make a medallion with the face of Jesus. And Zofia received this from Tadeusz Paulona, and she said that she did survive, of course, that this is something that gave her constant hope. It was illegal for her to have it, something that she had to constantly hide. And once somebody noticed that she has something, and another prisoner ran up to her and seemed to take it from her and give it to the capo, the prisoner functionary in the camp. And it happened to be just something else that this person was holding in their hand. She got to keep her medallion. Zofia Posmysz not only survived Auschwitz-Birkenau, but another German camp of Neustadt-Glewa with her fellow female prisoners. They walked back to Poland after they were liberated. And when she arrived in Poland, she resettled. She finished her university studies, became a journalist for Polish radio. She wrote about her experiences. She spoke about them. There was a radio play that she made about kind of a fictionalized version of her experiences of meeting one of the people that had repressed her, one of her former capos, as they were known. And this became ultimately an opera on Broadway. Zofia Posmysz, in the early 2000s, was contacted by one of our employees, one of our colleagues, I should say, at our center. And she then willingly was coming from Warsaw, where she lived, to Oświęcim, to speak with many young people, to provide interviews, and to make sure that the history of not only her own history, but those people that she lost, because the man who gave her this medallion was murdered by the SS in a camp for being in the resistance, that these histories didn't die. She became so close to many of the people that work at our center. This was before I started working there, but I did meet her a couple of times, that she decided that she wanted to die in Oświęcim. She contacted our director, former director of our center, who she was very close to, and he said he'll see what he can do. And when she was very weak, he found a space for her at the local hospice, and that's where she died after a few weeks. And she's also buried in Oświęcim. That's how close she felt associated to the site. And like I said, she was among one of the people, of course, that was brought here, and she died in a hospice. She died in a hospice that was founded by another one of the people that we see here at the very bottom on the left-hand side is August Kowalczyk. August Kowalczyk escaped from Auschwitz as a young Polish man. He was in one of the harshest work units, and it was known as the penal unit. He escaped, and 350 people were killed because of this kind of melee that happened, not because of him, but because other prisoners tried to escape as well. He was able to get away. He hid in a family across the river from Auschwitz-Birkenau, who held him for several weeks. That family also had a complicated history. They were so-called Silesians, a people that were kind of in between being German and Polish, depended on who's in power. That's what one of the women from the family said, because it was close to Germany, more close to Germany, but of course in between the two cultures. Silesians would have my throat for saying that, because they're their own culture, their own language, but their son was in the Wehrmacht because he was forced to be in the German military. But they hid August Kowalczyk as an escapee. And then people from Oświęcim helped him escape to Krakow, and he joined the resistance. He survived the war, became, in Poland, a very known actor. He often played German SS men and Gestapo men in films because he knew how they acted. And when he was becoming quite old, he realized that from speaking to the people who had lived in Oświęcim during this period, that there's no place for people to die with dignity in a hospice. And so he started to work at getting a hospice founded. And when it was finally built, he had cancer. And he came to this hospice to die there. These are the people, some of them. Of course, I'm not going to talk about every single person here. But these are the people that helped shape the center, the education, and the International Youth Meeting Center was the first education institution that was based next to Auschwitz. Today, the Auschwitz Museum has an extensive education center, which was founded in 2005. There's also the Center for Dialogue and Prayer, a Catholic center, which is nearby, which was founded later in the 1990s. But this is something that, of course, was the impetus for a lot of the discussions, a lot of the, talk around Auschwitz, not only for international groups, but also for the local community, to bring understanding and, of course, to promote the knowledge of this crime, which happened over 80 years ago. Today we have 3 women who have recently been visiting our center to talk to young people, all former prisoners of Auschwitz. On the left-hand side is Anna Szałaszna, who lives in Warsaw. Now, because of her health, she's not able to travel very far, but as a teenager, she survived Auschwitz. So did Zdzisława Włodarczyk in the middle. And she was somebody who was brought to Auschwitz as a teenager for no other crime other than being Polish and, of course, being in Warsaw during the Polish uprising, which happened after the ghetto uprising, as the war was ending. And she survived. And of course, Stefania Wernik, who's at the right-hand side, she's somebody that I know very well. I often moderate her meetings with young people. She was actually born in the camp. Her mother survived. By late 1944, women, if they gave birth in the camp, their children were not murdered. But that didn't mean that they would survive. They were simply kept in horrifying conditions with the mothers. She was somehow able to survive. And she never spoke about her experiences until recently. And she started to come to our center to talk about her mother, her experiences, and what trauma and, of course, challenges they faced after the war, having survived the camp. I just want to thank all of you for being here, for listening to this history. It's very important to me and to my colleagues, including one of them who's here. And if you wish to join our social media, I'm kind of forced to tell you about this in this modern world. We often put out information about former prisoners, moments in the history of Auschwitz. Of course, you can find us as the International Meeting Center in Oświęcim. In Polish, it's MDSM. But thank you, everyone, for your attention.
Thank you, David. We have a few moments for some questions. David's happy to hang here and try to answer some. So if you can just get my attention, we'll ask him a few questions. Yeah.
This is more of a what-if question, so I don't know if there's a super great answer to it. But do you think any of our education or knowledge of Auschwitz today would look different if the Soviet Union hadn't divided Europe following the end of the war?
I think that the information that we have today, which is readily available from the Holocaust Museum in Washington to the Auschwitz Museum, through books, well-researched books, by the way, we're very picky. Those of us who work as guides at the Auschwitz Museum, as well as the researchers there, there are many kind of historical fiction books which are based on a true story, which sometimes are not. But I know that this information, well, given that, of course, the Soviet Union fell, the communism collapsed, the censorship collapsed, it did come out, of course, but it took years. And so I don't think it'd be different information, but it would happen quicker. There's one thing that we would learn more about, and I think that's the resistance around Auschwitz, that people would come forward more quickly. You know, when you have suddenly one regime leaving and another totalitarian, authoritarian regime coming in and then trying to weed out those people who were in the wrong resistance. They weren't in the People's Army, they were in the Home Army, as was known. This becomes problematic, and people become tight-lipped, just like they were during the war. And that's what happened to a lot of the members of the resistance. And so that's one thing that most people don't really know much about, is that resistance that happened around the camps. It's now coming out. It's now something that is becoming more, of course, open. But that's what I think would have happened, that, you know, now that communism collapsed, yes, the information came out, but it wouldn't be different. The Auschwitz Museum is kind of a stickler for staying with the facts, that they don't overinterpret the facts. And one of the things when people ask me about Auschwitz and I explain it to them, some of the history, and they say, well, that doesn't make sense. And I say, well, does any of this make sense? You know, that people decided to do these things. It's not a logical process here, that they decided to suddenly murder people in gas chambers. For what reason? Because they were Jews. And so the information, I don't think, would have been different. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah.
Was your family living in Oświęcim at the time of when the camp was in use?
They were.
What was their experience as civilians, not really knowing what was going on in the camp?
No, they knew.
They knew?
They knew. People in the town knew. There was little that they could do. Most of the city population was expelled. So were members of my family. For example, this is my mother's side of the family. That's from Oświęcim. And so you have my grandfather and my grandmother's family. On my grandmother's side of the family, my great-grandparents and their kids were sent out of Oświęcim, dumped in the eastern part of Poland with basically nothing. But my grandmother was kept in the city because she was a young woman who could work. She was a seamstress. And she also was born in Germany to Polish parents before the Second World War. It's a long history, but they were trying to immigrate to the States. They got stuck in Germany. My great-grandmother was pregnant. The Red Cross kept her there. And then later they returned to Poland, kind of penniless, because they'd been robbed. But she had these papers that she was German. That she was born in Germany. And the German administrators, they kind of looked at that and said, well, maybe she can be useful to us. My grandmother refused to sign the document that was known as the Volksliste, which would kind of make her seem more cooperative. And as a result of this, that's why the rest of the family were expelled. And so she remained in Oświęcim. She became a worker sewing shoes at a local factory next to prisoners. My grandfather's side of the family, almost all of them remained in the city except for one sister of my grandfather, who was sent to Germany to do slave labor. And they were both forced laborers who worked next to prisoners. And after the war, they really didn't speak about it with my mom, with her brother, my uncle. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to learn so much about Auschwitz, is because this part of the history is something that is very foggy for me. And then as more I looked into it, the more I figured out why. My grandfather had been in the wrong resistance. And he was repressed after the war. He was basically not allowed to, you could say, get any sort of advance his career. And so as he had a young family, suddenly he wasn't able to get the better work that he sought. He was kicked out of his job as a policeman. So he was working for the state. He was working against the communists. And I don't even know what he was doing, but for that he was arrested. And then he was released when he signed a letter or the document stating that he would no longer take part. But for the rest of his life, until he died at 49 of a heart attack, he was repressed like this. And so that's my family's, you could say, experience. That aunt who was sent to the Germany, she later was in a displaced persons camp in Germany after the wars. Many Poles were who had been sent there. And because of what was happening with Poland, she didn't have contact with the family in Oświęcim. She traveled to the United States. She was able to get a sponsorship, as it was happening at that time. And she and her new husband, who's also a Pole, who's also in the displaced persons camp, they had married, and that's where they ended up in Colorado and later in Wisconsin. And they're the ones who invited my mother to the States in the 60s.
Other questions? Yeah.
It seems like in the past couple years, there's been a rise in anti-Semitism, and as a result, people denying the reality of the things that occurred in the Holocaust. Do you have any resources that would be good to combat that kind of misinformation that's getting really common on the internet?
That's a very good question. Holocaust denial is very difficult when you're trying to argue with people who don't believe in the thing you're arguing with them about. The first Holocaust deniers were the Nazis themselves. They're the ones who destroyed the evidence of the gas chambers. They tried to, at least. Most of the death camps, other than Auschwitz and Majdanek, were completely leveled. They burned the documents of these camps. And this kind of wave of Holocaust denial, meaning by the Nazis themselves, the people during the trials, that they didn't know anything, or that they were there, but this wasn't a death camp, things like this. That was the first stage. Then you had, of course, started again after the war a little bit later. Sometimes this was because of this kind of Germany being divided, that Germany is divided because of this, something that never happened, many of them would say. Today, Holocaust denial is amplified times, I don't know how much. It's very difficult to try and stop it. Even Marian Turski, a Polish survivor, Polish Jewish survivor, called on Mark Zuckerberg personally, publicly, saying that you have so much Holocaust denial material on Facebook, but you refuse to do anything about it. I know that there are First Amendment rights in the United States that would prevent any sort of censorship, but at the same time, the Auschwitz Museum is also dealing with this, and they're the ones who have become kind of the, when it comes from Poland, at the forefront of this. And it's interesting how they decided to deal with it. They decided not to engage with the deniers. It's a very interesting tactic. I hope that they're not going to be overwhelmed. We don't deal with this directly at our center. And what's interesting is that we don't actually have experience with young people coming to us and saying this didn't happen. Some of them may feel that the Nazis got a bad rap, but then after a normal discussion about it, not trying to explain to them that they're wrong, but just to say that this is the reason why they got the bad rap. But when it comes to the online hate and denialism, it's something that is quite overwhelming. And now there's another thing that is happening, AI. So it's not denying the Holocaust, it's changing the narrative of it. This is all something that I personally don't have experience with, dealing with these things, but the Auschwitz Museum does. The Polish government has sometimes also posted things to try and straighten things out. But yeah, the bots and everything, this is overwhelming because they're multiplying the message, and it's difficult for the you could say reliable sources to kind of do the same thing without the bot farm, So it's difficult, and I know the Washington Holocaust Museum also is dealing with this. Yeah, it's one of those things that, like I said, I don't have much experience with it personally, but dealing with it by not ignoring it, but studying what's going on, but also not engaging is the way that it's been done so far.
There are some academics that are actually trying to identify it as a topic of study itself. Abuse of Holocaust memory is the idea. And so they're trying to study how many different ways is it being abused, and can we sort of extract some principles from this, whether or not it would translate into tactics to combat it. I don't know. Yeah. We have time for another question or two.
I thought it was interesting and really cool that you mentioned at the museum that there's the opportunity to hear from speakers who are survivors themselves. And I was curious to know, the current projections state that in the next 15 years, 90% of Holocaust survivors will have passed away. And so given this misinformation battle that we are currently facing, and given the fact that we will no longer have access to in-person firsthand testimonies in the future, how are institutions like the one that you are from kind of dealing with that reality, and how do you see Holocaust education changing in the future when we're no longer able to access those kinds of testimonies?
I thank you for the question. Yeah, it's one of the things that has started several years ago. I can't pinpoint exactly when, but maybe 15, 20 years ago, is there was more of talk about this, not speaking about numbers and the atrocities themselves, but about people, which the Auschwitz Museum, in a way, has done for decades. And I don't know if you've been to the Auschwitz Museum, or I know some of you have been who are in this room. But when you visit the site, you walk through a corridor that attempts to rehumanize the victims by having, well, it's unfortunately a mugshot from the camp as they were registered there. And it tells you when they were registered and when they perished in the camp. The idea today is to rehumanize the victims, not just talk about these numbers and, of course, the statistics of everything that took place. But this is something that has been happening even at our center, where workshops are focused on one person. For example, Zofia Posmish, there's a workshop that one of my colleagues has been doing. There's also another prisoner named Henrik Mendelbaum, a survivor of the Sonderkommando, the prisoners who were burning the bodies. He managed to get away at the end during the chaos, during the liberation. And he escaped the death march away from Auschwitz, and the SS would have murdered him otherwise. Like many survivors, he came forward late in life to talk about his experiences. So there's also a workshop about him. And the idea is to present these people by name, to have a face. The USC Shoah Foundation also has started working, and I believe it's with the Skokie Holocaust Museum near Chicago, making holograms and of survivors answering questions. So it's interactive, that people can actually ask a question of a hologram, like a person is sitting there. And it's with mixed results, meaning that it doesn't sometimes work very well. Not because the question is bad or wrong, or the person doesn't have an answer, but just the technology isn't up to par. I think that personalizing is the most important thing here. But also the Auschwitz Museum has started this trend of changing the exhibit that is there at the museum. Currently, a new exhibition is in the Auschwitz Museum that deals with prisoner life. And instead of talking about the dry facts that this is what they wore, this is how the tattoos were done, this is the food that they ate, instead it talks more about the feelings that are from the different testimonies that are shared throughout thousands of testimonies about the despair, about the humiliations. And so it's also bringing about the emotional aspect of it. It's something that I think is a bit experimental, but at the same time, you're also talking about the names of the people who said certain things in the testimonies. And so that is important to kind of bring about the the face of the person or the name. And that is one of the ways that that's being done.
Perhaps one more question? Yeah.
No, microphone.
Yeah, you don't, do you?
No.
But they're recording it, so.
I don't know if I want to be recorded. David, one of the things my wife and I experienced before coming to Auschwitz with Paul and meeting you was we lived in Paris for almost 5 years. And we got to know a number of Jewish families and so forth. And a lot of them were from Poland. But France did not recognize their contribution to the Holocaust and shipping many people from Poland or other Jewish people, other people that were trying to get away, escape the Nazi thing. And until 1992, then Jacques Chirac said, we've got to face this. We've got to deal with this. And they began a Holocaust museum in Paris, which is really quite an educational thing now. And I noticed that many of the Balkan states, they don't want anything to do with this, really. They want to, their participation in it, they've suppressed it and have not, and it's hard to do. It's hard for Americans to deal with what happened to the Native Americans, what happened to, we've done with African Americans, all, those kinds of things that countries don't want to deal with. How has Poland dealt with that? I know it's a big question.
It's a very big question. And
2 minutes or less.
Yeah, 2 minutes or less. This is a very, very complex issue because when Poland was invaded, there was no government for the Nazis to collaborate with. They invaded in order to destroy it. Poland was to be stripped layer by layer of anything that was Polish. Its government, most of the government who was at the highest level escaped south through Romania, to France, to England, became the Polish government in exile, which it was almost a farcical situation that after the imposition of communism in Poland, they still functioned as the Polish government during the communist period, really not having much say in what is happening in Poland, but they still passed laws, they had meetings, and this was something that took place. So the Polish government suddenly disappears because the Nazis wanted to arrest these people, destroy them, literally. And there was no institution to really collaborate, not even on the local level, because these institutions were also being stripped of their, of course, representatives. And when the Nazis invaded and, of course, started taking over, they split Poland into different sectors. And one of them was the general government, as was known, kind of the, in quotes, of course, the dumping ground of the races, people that were to be taken care of later, and other areas which were to be Germanized. Now, in Poland, one of the things that is known is that Poland has the highest number of people known as the righteous among nations. Righteous among nations are people recognized by Israel, by Yad Vashem, the Israeli Institute for Holocaust Remembrance, as being helpers of Jews, letting them somehow survive by hiding them, by trying to get them to a safe spot. And but at the same time, there were, let's say, local collaborators or people who had helped, but there came a moment where they panicked or they were threatened and they threw out the Jewish family that or the person that they were trying to hide because of the situation that they were in. It's a very complex thing. And Poland today is the guardian of 6 death camps where basically all Jews were murdered, who were brought to them. Almost a small percentage of Sinti Roma people, non-Jewish Poles, were also murdered in these places when you compare the numbers, of course. And so you have the same situation. Not only are they the caretakers of these memorials, but they're also the caretakers of sites like the former Warsaw Ghetto, recreating, along with the cooperation of the Jews, some of the cultural life that they had in the past. But it's a very difficult situation because of the I'm missing a word here. It's not that I don't want to say it. It's just of the, I guess, resentment that many survivors had about what had happened. That this help came, it was sometimes within reach. They didn't receive the help. They had to escape. Most of their families died. And it's understandable. I mean, this is something that, of course, is a great trauma. And at the same time, then, one of the moments in Polish history that did not help at all was 1968 in March. In 1968 in March, because of these different revolutions, and not really but attempted revolutions, like in Czechoslovakia, there was the Prague Spring. People tried to kind of ease the communist regime in a way there. If you know what the Warsaw Pact is, it's kind of like the Eastern Bloc NATO. They invaded Czechoslovakia. It was a brutal invasion. It didn't look like the Second World War, but it was brutal enough, of course, to traumatize the Czechs. Still, there were protests in other countries, including Poland. And who was blamed for those protests by the communist state? Jews. The Jews who were in the Communist Party were the internal enemy. And this meant that they packed their bags, they were given basically tickets out of the country, and they were expelled. Some Jews remained. It's not that everyone was expelled from the country, but March of 1968 was also another traumatic moment. So you add that to the Holocaust that happened in this territory, and asking, this question is very difficult to answer, and so what work is being done by institutions like our center? We work internationally, of course, but it also has, of course, a local bearing too, where you're explaining to people and you're trying to preserve this memory of these people that were, of course, murdered and displaced like this. Not directly, we're not talking 68, but this also is something that I think a lot of us who work in this field have in the back of our minds. And so in our field, a lot of us have friends who are Jews who are coming with groups to Auschwitz and trying to rebuild those ties. And so that's on our level. On the institutional higher level, it's more diplomacy. Diplomacy that deals with the creation of the Polin Museum of Jewish History in Warsaw, which was a huge undertaking. It's kind of like the Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. that deals with the Holocaust, where it's kind of a government-run, yet a private foundation. And so that's how it operates. But it's something that Poland has supported and continues to, of course, support, even though there have been some political issues with its leadership, etc. So it's incredibly complex.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. But thank you for the question.
I'm sure there are more questions out there, but I also want to be faithful with our time this evening. So join me in thanking our speaker one more time. Thank you, David. Thank you very much. And I want to simply remind those in the honors program of our fireside chat coming in probably about 20 or 30 minutes. We'll be up there starting that. So if you can come to that, that'd be great. Thank you so much for coming and giving of your evening. And we have another event coming up. Poet and theologian Dr. Malcolm Geit will be here on February 2nd. That's our next event. You'll see, look for information about that. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.